Welcome to the Connor's Corner segment of Ask the Lawyer. With me right now is Professor Timothy Smith, who has a book out about the real horse soldiers. Welcome to Connor's Corner, Professor.
Thank you.
Last year, I think about this time, we had Ed Bars on this show, and he was talking about a movie, The Horse Soldiers, directed by John Ford, starring, among others, John Wayne. He said the movie was terrible, and he would have walked out of the picture except he was courting his future wife, and he decided not to be that impolite. Your book is about the same raid, The Horse Soldiers, correct?
Right. That's correct, yes.
Tell me one thing. What is correct about the movie and what is not correct, and what are you trying to get across with your book?
Well, I named it, of course, The Real Horse Soldiers, kind of as a takeoff to the movie because everybody's heard of the movie. But what I wanted to do is basically give the real story behind the movie, and there was a novel, and even Dee Brown's book and so on is not just totally accurate. And so I wanted to give the real story behind it. And in terms of the movie, what's not accurate, I would say it's set in the Civil War, and they got Newton Station right, and that may be about it. Of course, the name's changed to Colonel Marlowe and all of that, and the regiments are different, and they don't pick up a blonde woman and her slave, and they don't fight the little boys at the military academy and all of that. A lot of it is cinematic license and put in there for entertainment value.
Yeah,
but it was a real
fiction.
raid, and it was very important.
Taking aside they didn't fight the cadets, but they did raid Newton Station. What was the raid? Because some people may not have seen the film. Give the background. Who was Grierson, and what was the raid about?
Well, Benjamin Grierson was a musician, of all people, leading a cavalry brigade in April of 1863, and it all ties into the Vicksburg Campaign. Ulysses S. Grant is at his wit's end, basically, about how to approach Vicksburg. He's tried 6 different approaches, none of which worked, and so he's basically at the last straw. There is no plan B, or in this case, plan whatever, F or G. This is a do or die thing. He's going to go below Vicksburg and cross the Mississippi River and come up behind Vicksburg. If it fails, his career is probably over, potentially his life. The army may be destroyed or captured. This is do or die. So as a result, he incorporates as many feints and diversions as he possibly can, including Sherman back up north of Vicksburg, others as far up as Greenville on the river. But the main diversion, of course, is Grierson's raid that leaves LaGrange, Tennessee, and moves southward through Mississippi to break the Southern Railroad of Mississippi at Newton Station. And that is basically the lifeline for Vicksburg. But there's more to it than just breaking the railroad, which they do for a couple of weeks or so. The real intent of the raid and results, actually, of the raid is to try to throw the Confederate High Command, namely John Pemberton, off of his gyroscope and get his attention elsewhere, anywhere else but Grant's Crossing Place south of Vicksburg. And Grierson will lead this raid and pop out of nowhere in Newton Station on April the 24th and absolutely consume Pemberton's attention. So in that respect, it works like a charm.
Now, of course, you set the stage, 1863. When they go from LaGrange, Tennessee, eventually to Baton Rouge, Mississippi, they're not...
Louisiana.
Louisiana, I'm sorry. This is not friendly territory.
No, absolutely not.
And how many men did Grierson have at the start of the raid?
Well, at the start of the raid, he'll have about 1,700. But part of the way through, he will send one regiment back as a diversion. What's interesting in terms of the diversion and so on, Grierson is a diversion to Grant, but there are diversions within the diversion to divert away from Grierson's raid too, and one of those is that he sends one of those regiments, the 2nd Iowa Cavalry, back to LaGrange in order to try to take some attention there, and in order to allow him a little better way to move southward. So as he gets through the rest of the raid, he makes most of the raid with about 900 or 1,000 men.
How many casualties did he suffer? Because I think that's one of the great parts of the story.
Exactly, yeah. I don't remember right off the top of my head, but it's like 3 killed and 7 wounded, something like that. Maybe 8 or 10 left behind, that got sick or couldn't travel or just wandered off, deserted or whatever. But minuscule casualties compared to how many men he had and how long they're on the march and the accomplishments of the raid.
Now, why was that?
Why are so few casualties?
Yes.
Yeah, well, mainly because Grierson realizes that he is there to damage and divert rather than fight. Sure, he could have gotten a lot of attention had he gone down and picked on the first brigade he found somewhere, infantry brigade manning a railroad station. But that's not his intention. He wants to move fast, create as much havoc as possible, and then disappear and show up 40 miles away and do the same thing, And he knows if he gets into a big firefight that he doesn't have the firepower or probably by that point the stamina among the men or the horses to fight. And a classic example, the artillery Battery K of the 1st Illinois, artillery that he takes with him are armed with 2-pounder Woodruff guns, 2-pounders, not small little 6-pounders, much less 12-pounders or any of the larger 24-pounders or something like that. These are little 2-pounder pop guns that aren't going to do much against regular artillery, obviously. But if he doesn't have to fight any regular artillery and encounters only cavalry or maybe some infantry that has no artillery support, then these little pop guns will come in handy, and they do on various occasions.
What happened in Newton Station? Because I think that, the battle in the movie is very dramatic and everything else. Was it like that?
No, absolutely not. In fact, it's almost anticlimactic how it all occurs at Newton Station. Grierson knows how to plan things and when to do things and so on, and he knows to hit Newton Station at daylight, right as the sun's coming up, just a little after daylight. And obviously that's been a tenet of military planning forever, at Shiloh or Pearl Harbor or wherever. So he pushes his men all through the night before, and much of the night before that, to get them in position to hit right at daylight. And he does it in a couple of waves, and the first wave hits Newton Station and realizes a couple of trains are coming. They find out from some of the people that a couple of trains are coming, so they is really anticlimactic. He takes over the telegraph office to make sure no messages get out, and then his men basically hide so that the trains will come on into town. And when they do so, one after another, they basically take the trains, and then they come out into the open, and start damaging and destroying rails and all that kind of stuff. But no, there is no Confederate troops that arrive on the rail cars and form up and charge down the middle of town and all of that. And really, just about as quickly as it starts, he has his men, damaging and destroying military property. They don't mess with anything private, but just about as quickly as they start, they sound recall and head out, and they're gone. A lot of the damage, here we hear about the damage to Newton Station and all that. Really, the target, a battalion or so, is sent farther to the east to damage the railroad bridges, big long railroad bridges over the Chunky River just east of Newton. So that's really where the major damage to the railroad itself comes. But of course, there is some infrastructural damage at Newton itself.
Now, does your book go into the butternut guerrillas?
Yes, Serby and the Scouts. I do talk quite a lot about them because they're an integral part of the story. I had to watch myself. One of the major sources for the book, of course, and the raid is Serby's own account. And he wrote like 5 or 6 different accounts, one long article after article in the National Tribune, and wrote several different books about it and so on. And, obviously when he's telling his story, he's the center of attention and he's the main character. And so I had to really be careful that I didn't want Serby to be the main character in this book, So I had to watch, what stories I told, what anecdotal material I used, and so on, because I didn't want it to be just a biography of Serby, or Grierson's raid is seen by Serby, or something like that. But yes, I do use him and others quite extensively in dealing with the scouts, and I hope I have put the scouts and the butternut guerrillas basically in the right context within the raid itself.
Now, for the audience out there, they may have no idea what we're talking about. Who were the butternut guerrillas?
Well, they were a group of about 9 scouts that were basically tasked with doing all scouting for the brigade about 4 or 5 days in. Grierson realized that we've got scouts out and flankers and all that, but we need a dedicated body of really, really smooth talking, slick scouts that can schmooze their way into homes and with Confederate officers and all of that. And so they dress in sometimes Confederate uniforms, mostly in homespun butternut colored clothing that they get from the locals in the area. And they pass themselves off as ministers and deacons and civilians, and they find out a lot of information. They find out where the plantations are, they find out where the food is, and they find out where the enemy is, and they keep Grierson apprised of any threats and possibilities, and they really are a key part to this whole operation.
And a lot of these guys were born in southern states.
Well, some of them were. Serby himself was actually born in Canada, of all places. There's a little bit of dispute. When I looked at his compiled service record in the National Archives, at one point in the record it says he was born in Ohio, and another point it says he was born in Canada. And I think the common perception and accepted theory is that he was indeed born in Canada. And in fact, talked to one of his descendants who still lives in Canada, as a college professor up there in Canada now.
It's interesting. Now, of course, Grierson, how does the raid end up?
Well, they reached Baton Rouge. They hit Newton Station on April the 24th, and the whole intention then is to come out into the open. They're trying as stealthily as possible to get to Newton, but then they pop out of nowhere and cause all this damage on the railroad, which obviously is going to attract attention with the telegraph and all of that. But then his intention, of course, is to disappear again. And everybody, Confederates and probably most of his troops as well, think, okay, we're going to turn around and go back north, go out the same way we came in. But he doesn't do that. He goes south, which he continually does exactly what the Confederates think he won't do. And he meanders his way westward first, trying to link up with Grant, but unfortunately he doesn't know exactly when or even if Grant has crossed the Mississippi River. He thinks he may be a little bit late, so he hurries forward. In reality, he's a little bit early because he had hurried so much. And so the link up there is never made, so he decides, I can't just sit still. They're going to catch us if we do, so I got to get out of here. So he heads to the nearest Union conclave, and that's Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and he reaches there on May the 2nd, all tired down but victorious in what they attempted.
Now, what did Grierson do? I think the audience might find this interesting. What did he do after the Civil War?
Well, he wins I believe a major generalship in the volunteers, but when everybody leaves the army, the volunteer army, of course, you lose your commission and all of that. And a lot of these professional officers, West Point officers and so on, who were major generals in the Union Army during the Civil War, would be busted back to major and lieutenant colonel, in the regular army. Grierson actually goes into the regular army and becomes colonel of the 10th United States Cavalry, one of the Buffalo Soldiers regiments out west in primarily Texas. So he commands that for much of his career and retires on over in the 1890s. We're
over 150 years from the raid. Why is it worth studying, and why is it worth mentioning these guys?
Well, obviously it gets a lot of attention, popular history in terms of the movie and the novels, and D. Brown, wrote the book on it, and everybody knows Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee and all of that. But in terms of, and this is one of the things I try to do in the book, put it in the proper context of the Vicksburg Campaign. And so I think, the real importance is its effect on the Vicksburg Campaign itself, and Grant's, maneuvers and crossing the river and the diversion that it made and all that. And of course, there are arguments among buffs and historians and everybody else about the importance of the Vicksburg Campaign. So whatever you think is if you think Vicksburg is the crushing blow to the Confederacy and the classic campaign in the war, then Grierson is going to hold a very high role in that. You'll have a high opinion of it. If, like many think, Vicksburg takes second fiddle to Gettysburg and all that, you may not think it quite so important. But depending on where you place Vicksburg, I think there's no doubt that Grierson plays a huge role in how the Vicksburg campaign develops and who wins and who loses.
Okay, well, the name of the book, The Real Horse Soldiers, Benjamin Grierson's epic 1863 Civil War raid through Mississippi. The author, Professor Timothy Smith. Thank you for being on Connor's Corner.
Thank you for having me.